بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيد الأنبياء والمرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين أما بعد. Last time we had actually started talking about Adalah. I think we finished up our discussion of what Adil was. What did we say about Adil? We said that there are conditions for Adalah. There are 5 conditions, yes? What were they? Adil is trustworthy, yes. They has to be Muslim, mashallah. I'm glad you can read the slide. What else? Sane. Makes sense. Good. What else? An adult. So over here, we said that when we said that if a person was sane, is an adult. What are the conditions that we're talking about? So if somebody shows a lack in sanity, and we said, why is sanity an issue, or why do we use it as a condition? What happened?
They were saying it was going to go all over the place.
Sometimes yes, sometimes no.
By nature, they can't be trustworthy.
Why can't they be trustworthy?
Well, if they're not sane, then they're not in the reality.
It's an issue of perceived reality, right? So when we were talking about before, here we're not talking about the individual himself, right? So it's not about grading this person or talking about his Islam. We're talking about what? Narrating, right? This is a very important point that we're discussing narrating here. We're not talking about an individual's Islam. Is it possible that a person have mental health issues and still be a good Muslim? Yeah, absolutely, right? That's not a problem. Does it mean that he'll be a good narrator? Right? This is a different discussion. And that's where that reliability comes in, and that's where that's an issue that needs to be discussed and talked about. Free from open sin. What does that mean?
It's publicly committing. Publicly committing.
Right, he's not publicly committing sin. And why is that important?
Because if he is committing sin in public, then if that's the example, he's going to give a bad example about it.
So are narrators supposed to be exemplary? No, right? Because you do have some narrators that have some, I don't want to say they had some strange character traits, right? Not to say that they were bad people, again. We're not talking about this, that's what happened. Yeah, dude, I don't know what to do. Right?
I mean, not you, but I have the slide purposes.
Yeah, I don't need the slide, I just maybe do this slide. This is what happens when you don't have a common scheme. So anyway, the issue that we're discussing again is, all right, if this person is free from open sin, why is that important? Because if a person does openly sin, what does that say about that individual?
Their character?
Right, it speaks on their character, and not just that. If an individual is willing to speak that, and if an individual is willing to say that, or like to do these things publicly, how much value does he have for deen? It's okay. Right, not too much. So, and if we have a show of an individual not having that much value for the deen, can we trust him now to narrate? Okay, and what is the last condition? There are 5. So I'll help you guys with that much.
Dignified conduct.
So dignified conduct. So we said right? So we have to make sure that this person has dignified conduct. And what are some of the things that we had said were examples of having dignified conduct, and what does that actually mean? Yes.
Yeah. It's subjective, but mostly it's in the direction of.
Okay. It's subjective. What's subject? Yes. Cultural. Yeah. The person has to act culturally appropriate. And that's, I'm sorry? Right. Like the example that we use is like, somebody walking in, he takes his jacket off, puts all his apples in this jacket, and he goes and he walks out. Did he do anything wrong? No. Right? And again, this is very similar to when we were talking about the sanity issue. Just because a person does these things, it might show that he's not exhibiting neurotypical behavior. Does that mean that he's a bad person?
No.
No. Does it mean he's a bad Muslim? No. But it's Is this person somebody we want to trust with narrations?
No.
It's not, because it's a sign of. We had talked about things. We had talked about the innovator, how to deal with the innovator, different types of innovators, why we don't trust narrations from innovators. This was a much longer discussion. We had talked about different types of adala. We had talked about the relationship between that and taqwa. We had talked about the different rulings that can be passed on a narrator in regards to their adala. So we had said that there are 5 things. There's adala batina, adala zahira. We had talked about somebody who's adala zahira, somebody who's mas'ul. We talked about majhul al-hal. We talked about majhul al-ayn. We talked about tawaqquf, like pausing a ruling and not making a ruling on an individual. And when does that happen?
You don't know. You don't have enough data.
I don't have enough information. Right? If I don't have enough information to pass a ruling on a narrator, then I do something that's called tawaqquf, where I pause. So this happens both in situations where there's majhul al-ayn and majhul al-hal. What is the difference between them? Right, majhul al-hal is general, and majhul al-ayn is specific. What does that mean? How does that help me? Is yet to be known? Possible. It's a very, with a very positive view of narrators. So, majhul al-hal, meaning that I know who this individual is, but what? I don't know his condition, right? So I might, and we had used the example of, so people who are in politics, right? They're a well-known politician, but does it mean that I know their level of narrating? No. And this is majhul al-hal. Majhul al-ayn, I don't even know, many times I don't even know the person specifically. I don't know anything about this person's name. Or if I do know a name, it's like a super general name, like Abdullah. So these type of things, this would be what's called majhul al-ayn. And then the last part is adam al-adala, which is the opposite of those things, right? Which is when an individual is actually considered untrustworthy, and how to declare an individual untrustworthy. Kadhab, we had said that this one's an individual we considered a liar. This is how to determine adala. We had spent a lot of time discussing this. Today, inshallah, we're going to be talking about law and precision. What is precision? What is law?
Mistakes.
Right. It's a looking at a person's mistakes. What am I testing? So if I'm focusing on a narrator's mistakes, what is it that I'm looking for? So why wouldn't that be a discussion for adala and its trustworthiness?
Well, that's what both means.
It doesn't mean trustworthy. But I'm saying here, if I can't trust the person, you notice how you put trust in there?
Precision is like accuracy. How many times?
Not accuracy. Right? It's a judge of that individual's accuracy.
It's not his mistakes or faults, just accuracy.
Right. So it can be mistakes, right? So what are some mistakes that I present? If a person narrates and he can mistakenly narrate things, can his mistakes get to a point where we start talking about his trustworthiness? Yes, it can. And we'll get into that. We'll talk about that, inshallah. So narrating a narration as it was heard, either in wording or meaning, in this individual, he may occasionally forget why. Because it's human, right? Like human people, like human beings forget. Yeah. Right? It's a very realistic thing and problem that we all face. But the more precise you are, the less what you have. Mistakes, right? So again, this idea from we said that the first condition out of the 5 conditions of a hadith to be sound was adala, right? And that focus on adala, what are we trying to remove?
The mistakes, the doubts.
The adala. Lies. Right? So we're trying to remove lying. All of the other conditions we said we're trying to remove what? Mistakes. Right? Because lying is easy, right? Either this person is going to be a liar or he is not. Now, if he's not doing it on purpose, now we have a space where we can actually determine, okay, it's possible that this person forgot or he made a mistake. And that's where this section focuses on the most. So an individual who narrates a narration in agreement with how he heard it from his shaykh. Again, in wording or meaning. Now, what is the difference between two? Look, this is as an idea, And dhabit is as an individual, okay? So that's the difference between these two. And the one who most likely narrates is as he received it, and the one who most likely is correct more often than he is mistaken, right? So these are all different ways to express the same idea. And within them, you're going to have levels, right? Within all of these, you're going to have different levels. There are some things that are important to note and important to keep in mind. This does not mean his hadith are accepted without question. If I find someone who does make mistakes in his narrations, can I accept his narrations?
Not even more confidence, like that's the first step.
Right, so this gives me more confidence in this person, right? Because if there's a group of narrators and we know to be precise, but we don't accept their narrations, like what group?
Innovators?
No, not innovators. We're talking about precision here. Al-Muḥaddithīn, right? You guys remember, what is al-Muḥaddith? Somebody who purposely what?
Remove the guy between them.
Right, he removes the intermediary. So is it possible that that person is known to be precise? And he has good hifz, and he has he has good shuyukh, etc. He's been praised, absolutely. Like all of those characteristics can apply, but once I have the hadith, the mudaddis is going to accept it? No, right? I have to what?
Know the middle gang.
I have to investigate, right? It requires an investigation. Did this mudaddis do the tasrih bis-sama'? And did he actually say that he heard it from the previous person, or did he use the other tool of narrating, which is what? Who remembers? On what? On the authority words. Right. So did he use an, or did he use I heard, or eyewitness, or I'm the one who read on the shaykh, right? So did he use one of those ways of narrating, or did he say on the authority of which we said that is a means for them that they seem to narrate? And why did they do that? Because they didn't want to be called liars, right? So if they said I heard and they didn't hear it, what happens? You're a liar. That it's important that we're not talking about an individual who never makes mistakes, right? Because everybody will make a mistake. And this is a preliminary condition. It's a preliminary condition, meaning that this is one of the steps I will take in order to help accept this narrator's, the ruling on this narrator. And if there's no reason to doubt his precision in a particular hadith, so for example, if he's narrating a hadith in which there are 7 narrators and he's challenging all of the other narrators. These guys are saying the Prophet ﷺ went right, and he, the lone one, he's saying that he went left. Does that give me confidence in the narrations? No. It actually lessens my confidence in it. If he narrates without support, so you have narrators saying that the Prophet ﷺ went right, and then he said that he's narrating that the Prophet ﷺ went forward. So he's not going against, right? But he's the only one that he's saying that.
We don't accept it as well.
Right, so we remember
they put on the side.
Right, this is the one that we put on the side because this is the tafarruq, right? So now we have a lone narration. How do I deal with this lone narration? That requires another set of steps in order to analyze it. We also said that who would not be considered precise? The one who is mistaken more than he is correct. And this can be due to a number of reasons. The sheer number of mistakes. If I find that 80% of this guy's hadith are mistaken, right, there's a problem there, right? There's an issue there. Like either this guy during his classes he wasn't what? Like he wasn't paying attention at all, right? Right? He was playing on his phone, right? He kept asking ChatGPT how to challenge the shit, right?
They use ChatGPT on the rock.
He's talking this way, but I hear it right there.
So, right, either he absolutely wasn't paying mistake, right, or he just wasn't mentally present, or what is the other possibility? Right, like sleeping, like you have all of these things, or a person just doesn't have what?
He's lacking.
Right, he doesn't have that memory, right? He just doesn't have that strength of memory. Like you ask him, hey, what happened here, and like he'll just remember like bits and pieces. He won't be able to narrate the whole story. So it becomes very challenging for that person. So here, the gravity of the mistake. So, for example, the Prophet ﷺ said there are 5 pillars in Islam, and then you have this guy coming and saying there are 4 pillars in Islam. What do you guys think about that mistake?
I mean, it's not a mistake.
This is what you remember, right? He wasn't paying attention to what his sheikh told him, and he's just narrating this hadith.
I'm not going to call it a mistake.
Okay.
I mean,
But is this like the Prophet ﷺ used siwak 7 times and he's like the Prophet ﷺ used siwak 9 times? Is that like a
It
huge?
depends on the subject, first of all, but.
It's not a huge mistake. But if somebody he's coming down and he's saying, oh well, Islam actually has 6 pillars. And the Prophet ﷺ said Islam has 6 pillars. What do you Islam have to say?
He's a liar.
Right? Either he can be lying or what? His mistake is so huge, right? This is such a big mistake that it's actually not telling any more of his precision, but of his what?
deceit.
His trustworthiness. Now we start actually doubting his adana, right? Why? Because of the gravity of the mistake, right? Now you're actually misrepresenting the religion by saying these things versus these other small mistakes, right? So if you have someone, for example, who said that the Prophet ﷺ, when he during the shahad he raised his finger up and down. You have someone else saying that he didn't move his finger. Some said that he held his finger in this way, right? So these type of mistakes in narrating. What do you think about the people who are narrating them in these different ways, or who are mistaken about it? Does it have a huge effect on the religion? No. Is that a mistake that we'd be like, oh, it's okay, man. Like it's such a specific, minute issue. Maybe it's you know what I mean? Like the way they heard it or relate it. It's possible that they misunderstood. Yes?
Yes.
Right? In those spaces, we would kind of allow for mistakes. But when we're talking about like major pillars, you know, somebody says like, oh, was the cat's 2.5%? This person misheard. He's like, yeah, the cat's 25%. It is possible, right? But now you start like, okay, can I really trust this person? You know what I mean? Like it gets to a point where you can actually start questioning the trustworthiness and the adana of this individual.
It's like higher.
Yeah, no, it's not. I mean, it's not just increases. Like it increases to the point where it's like, okay, this is not a memory issue, right? There's something bigger that's going on that is actually causing me to question if I can trust you to narrate. Yeah. Like, are you fabricating? Is there deceit going on, or are you just at this level of like you're in this fantasy world that you just are unable to differentiate between reality and fantasy? And now that's not a question of precision anymore. This is a question of adana. Remember, we talked about sanity and these type of things. Like, okay, if a person isn't mentally there, at that point we would lose trust in that person and that narrative. So if it reaches a point that he's actually defining reality, then this would be a question, again, where we go back to adana. It's no longer an issue of law, right? It's no longer an issue of precision. So adana versus depth, there are a few things that are different. So a lack of adana can cause the narrations to be rejected. So, right, so we have 2 types. We basically have narrators that are, in general, accepted, right? So we would say that these people are trustworthy, right? And even if they're at the lowest levels of even if they're at the lowest levels of trustworthiness, they're still what? They're still trustworthy. And if they're not trustworthy, they're what?
The other side.
They're on the other side, which is
Denied or
like they're liars, or like, you know what I mean? Like they have some major issue. Can we say the same for precision? Is there a line? Is there like a clear line that's like, okay, now when they get to this point?
I mean, there should be some.
Okay, how?
They're trustworthy.
How do you, like, and we're not talking, remember, we're not talking about trustworthiness here, we're talking about precision. So at what point in precision can I say, okay, this person is rejected?
Or when you have evidence that.
I mean, but do you see how the conversation is that much more difficult?
Yeah.
Right? Over here, the conversation is pretty easy when we talk about adana, when we talk about their trustworthiness. But the conversation when it comes to their precision, it's not as easy. You don't have like, okay, when you get to this point, they're no longer accepted. Because if I have somebody, for example, he's like a super weak student.
It's like an individual case, I guess, right?
So there is some case by case, but I'm saying like there's a lot of subjectivity to it. Like,
Each individual is different as far as their accuracy goes.
no, for sure, right? But I'm saying even in trustworthiness, it is too, right?
Yeah, that's true, yeah.
Right? Even when we were going through the introduction of Muslim, how did Imam Muslim grade narrators? Did he say, oh, this guy's level 7, right, this guy's about 12? How did he do it? Who remembers?
Spectrum. Two, right?
Huh?
Was it just 2?
No. He compared. He said that this narrator is not like the likes of this narrator, this narrator. And that's all he could do, right? Why? Because there's no number system that you can put in place to actually say, okay, these narrators are on this level and these narrators are on this level. So the most he could do is he could compare them. And,
So
and
like
they're-
you
they're-
combine the narrators, so.
Yeah, so he would group some of them together.
Like group two, group.
Yeah. So he would like group 3 narrators together, and then he would compare them to another 3, or he would compare one narrator to another, right? Because it's the only way to do it, right? Okay, these guys are the highest level, and then these are the people who would be less than them, etc. The problem here, when we talk about precision, is that there are a lot more levels, right? Versus here, I think the levels, it's a much broader spectrum. Over here, the spectrum gets a lot tighter, and you can clearly see, you know, where the people are at. And the problem with this is like, okay, even if you have like a super weak student, if I have somebody, for example, like, you know, he just passed with like a D- from his class, what does that tell me?
Is the bare minimum.
Well, not just the bare minimum, but there's sometimes he's what?
Putting some work or he's
Right. Sometimes he's putting some work in, and sometimes he is
lacking.
correct, right? There are times where this individual is correct. And if I have a student like that, and then I have another student like that, and I have like maybe a third student like that, and all of them are telling me the same thing,
Oh, I see.
The teacher
You
is.
put them on a group.
right? I can put them in one group, not just put them in one group, but I can, now there's a chance that what they're saying is what? Correct. Versus if I have somebody here who's trustworthy and somebody who's not. Or here, if I have 3 people who are untrustworthy. Do you see the difference? If I have 3 people who are untrustworthy and they all come to me and they tell me that, somebody's outside. And these 3 people are untrustworthy. Can I trust what they're saying?
You can check.
I can't. I will check. Why?
Because you know that.
Because I know these people aren't trustworthy, right? And so, what if I have 5 untrustworthy people tell me?
Same thing.
10, 100. Does it matter? No. But with this, what happens? What changes? That actually, the more people I have who are weak,
The more trustworthy.
the more trustworthy it becomes, right?
Opposite.
Versus in this situation, it doesn't matter how many untrustworthy people there are. You could bring 100 or 1,000. I'm still not going to.
Still not trustworthy.
I'm still not going to trust you. Like, you're a bunch of liars. Like, I don't care if you're agreeing on something. So that's one of the biggest differences between Adad and when we
Makes
have
it
this.
worse. Yeah.
I'm sorry?
It actually makes it
Oh, it
worse.
starts making it worse? It's like, you guys are definitely working
talking
together,
about
right?
it.
A lot of stuff. So there are different types of weakness and precision. So over here, you have 2 major types. You have what we call continuous, al-Qa'im, and you have something that is situational, which is a quality, right? So something happened. What does continuous mean? Is like this person always had memory problems, like always, right? You know, from the time they started narrating until they passed away, the individual always had memory problems. And then you have situational, meaning that something happened,
During their lifetime.
right? Something happened during their lifetime that caused their weakness too. Right, like it's something. There's some traumatic event, right? There's some trauma that happened in their life that actually caused them to completely change the way that they're narrating. Sometimes it's the death of a son or a daughter, right? And then because of the trauma that they have, they don't narrate the same way that they used to, right? Their memories and this one. Why? Because the drive that they had maybe before is gone now. Other examples are somebody who he used to narrate from his books, right? Like so, he used to write a lot, he used to record a lot, and his library burns down. How reliable are his narrations going to be after that happens? Right, less so, right? It's going to be difficult to trust that person. Sometimes brain trauma, right? So an individual actually gets hit, or somebody, he goes to war, he goes to battle, he fights, something happens, like, you know, he gets hit in the head, and he just doesn't remember the way that he used to. And these are all weapons, right? So all of these things actually happen. But yes, like these situations happen which cause their memory to actually change.
Sheikh, you just mentioned
Yeah.
a library burned down.
Yeah.
How does that affect his position, though? Their position?
So here, well, it's a good question. How would someone's library burning down affect that individual's position?
That person actually takes notes or reads through his notes
Right.
instead of memorizing.
This person didn't rely on his memory.
And then,
What did he rely on?
paper.
He relied on his notes, right? He relied on his actual
When he
physical
reads it,
recordings.
it's like clicks.
Yes.
Okay, this was.
Yeah. So this individual is what we call mukhtalif. Mukhtalif means change, right? So that's what the word means. Khalat means to like mix up. So over here, mukhtalif, there's things that cause him to change, but just because an individual changes, does that mean that we reject his narrations? No. There are situations where we can actually accept it. So if we know that this narration is before that change happened, so for this individual whose library burned down, if I find a narration that I know for sure is before his library burned, What can I do with that narration? I can accept it, right? Because I know this was before that change happened. Additional corroborate reports. So if he's not the only one narrating, is it after this change, like we said, he gets weaker, but he's still not what?
It's like these students, like.
Yeah, he's not untrustworthy, right? So he's a lesser position in terms of his precision, but we don't reject his narrations. Meaning that if other people come and corroborate his reports, I can actually do well. I can accept it. If the change is slight, so and this doesn't happen too much, but basically you have some of the Muḥaddithīn, some of the Naqd, some of the Hadith critics. What they'll do is they'll say, so like normal people, like us, like inshallah, when we get old, is our memory going to be as good as it is right now? I mean, like, I'm almost there, but like the rest of you guys, mashallah. Like, you know what I mean? So the thing is like,
If you implant something.
Neuralink,
Mm-hmm.
get some chat GP going.
Yeah.
Then you'll ask me questions.
Of course.
So in this situation, the slight change is something that's normal, right? So having a slight decline in our memory is something that's very normal and natural, and that's why his narration will actually still be considered acceptable. Lastly, if he is stopped from narrating after the change, why would that be a condition for me to accept his narration?
Stopped? What's stopping?
Him stopping is actually the black on his own.
Hmm.
There's no confusion.
Yeah.
There's no confusion left.
So, let's say they have dementia or something.
Yeah.
Right, and so they completely stop narrating after that.
So
Then it doesn't.
I use this phrasing I use on purpose.
Stops narrating. Yeah, there's a trick, right?
It's always true.
Stops narrating.
He is stopped, meaning,
Yeah.
did he stop himself?
Yeah, that was an answer.
Others stopped him.
Mhm.
And who could those others be?
Those are mine.
Colleagues?
Maybe his children. Absolutely, right? The children, they start seeing the change in their father, and what do? Like people people come and be like, we're here to learn from your father, we're going to take hadith from him. What do they say?
He's not well.
They say, no, he's not well. Who else can stop him? Maybe other teachers, right? Maybe some of his, some of his compatriots, some of his students, right? They in order to protect their sheikh, they're like, hey, listen, it's probably not a good idea for him to continue narrating. So how does that make me accept this person's narrations though? It guarantees that there are no narrations that came afterward, right? So all of the narrations were when? Before he changed. So if I can guarantee that all of these narrations were before he changed, is there any reason for me to doubt the narration? No. All other situations are rejected. Can you guys think of another situation where there might be an exception to this? I think it sums it up pretty well. Types of fault. So this is going back to your question. There are two types of fault. One is going to be, or what do you guys think? Neuralink is the third type, doesn't it? Actually, it's not. It's actually a modification of the second. What are the two types of precision that an individual can have?
Was it written and then
Written and memory. That's it. So here, from memory, that this person had very strong memory. You have some of the Muḥaddithīn, they would say things like, I never saw black and white in my life. Meaning that they never touched an ink to paper. And their memory was, they're considered precise narrators.
Natural.
They were naturally gifted by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in having this ability to have this extensive memory. And then writing, right? And this is something, and are there problems with somebody who relies on their writing, mostly, if not completely? What are some issues or problems that can come up?
He has to have his notes always with him, actually. Probably, not always, but
Most of the time, right? Or access to them.
access to them, yeah.
Right? An individual will need access to his notes and his recording. Sure. What else?
They might burn down.
I'm sorry? I can't.
I said if they lose it.
If they lose it, that's definitely a problem. What else? Okay, I'm sorry?
Misinterpreting their own notes or something.
Right. All right, so I'll take that a step further. They misread. right? So they're narrating, even though it's written in front of them, what can they do? So they can misread. That's from this. What about from this? Is there a possibility of mistake? That's in giving. What about taking? Do scribal errors happen? Like even when we're taking notes, do we make mistakes when we're writing? Right? So this is part of the problem, part of the issue that comes in written. Like, so some people might be like, oh, why didn't everybody just write it down? Some of them didn't trust, like, the writing. We have to realize that this is a time before you could just go, like, you go to Imam Bukhari and be like, hey, listen, can I get a copy of your book? And he's like, yeah, sure, there's staples over there, you just go photocopy it. Is that how it works? Hey, what do they do? Ask scribes, right? And even within scribes, there were some scribes that were good, and there's some scribes that were bad. Right? And that just, that's the nature of everything, right? So sometimes you have good quality, people who provide a good service, and people who provide a less quality service. Narrating and meaning.
On that two comparison, which were higher.
Which is higher? So the one who's able to combine. Alright, so that would be the highest, the one who's actually, and why? Because the person who has it memorized, even if he does forget something, what can you do? You can go back and you can check. Narrating and meaning. So is it permissible for scholars or for narrators to narrate a hadith, not in the wording, but in the meaning? All of al-Muḥaddithīn say yes, in general. Are there certain situations which require a more precise way of narrating? Yes, there are. And we'll talk about that in the Manhaj, inshallah. But in general, these are the two conditions that the scholars of hadith have put forward. The first condition being that this person have a good understanding of the Sharia. Right? If he has a good understanding of Sharia, the likelihood of him making a mistake saying that instead of zakat being 2.5% is 25%, would a person who understands Sharia narrate something like that? No, right? That is not something that would happen. Why? Because he understands it. The other one is having a good grasp of the language. If I don't know the Arabic language well, is it okay for me to start substituting synonyms that I don't have a good grasp on the meaning of? No, right? So these are the two conditions. I need to have knowledge of the Sharia, and I need to have knowledge of the Arabic language. So the types of hadith that cannot be narrated in meaning. Well, what do you guys think?
It has a meaning.
In meaning only. Not, we're talking about this is wording versus meaning. So whatever, here, let me ask the question in another way. What hadith do I have to narrate with the prophetic wording? I don't have a choice. I'm sorry? But in wording, that the Prophet ﷺ, he said this, and I have to narrate it the way that he said it. Qudsi? No, even Qudsi can be narrated in meaning.
Don't have to do with rulings?
Even rulings, as long as the ruling, again, having knowledge of the Sharia and making sure that I'm narrating. The Prophet ﷺ told us to pray 4 rak'ah for Salat al-Dhuhr. And the person who narrates a meeting, the Prophet ﷺ said, it's Salat al-Dhuhr is 4 rak'ah. Right? He changed the wording, but the meaning is still sound. When I start, you guys are gonna be like, oh, but dua. So if it's a prophetic dua, I have to say that the Prophet ﷺ, in his dua, he said X, Y, Z. Okay? For example, رَبَّنَا آتِنَا فِي الدُّنْيَا حَسَنَةً وَفِي الْآخِرَةِ حَسَنَةً وَقِنَا عَذَابَ النَّارِ. This for sure we can say is prophetic, right? This is the prophetic, so the Prophet ﷺ actually says this. Like in line with this, what else? Of course there's more. It's not just dua. That's Quran. Oh, no, you know what? No, you're right. So, but that would fall under dhikr. Right? So, Subhanallah bil a'la, Subhanallah bil azim, Rabbi Firli, between the two sajdas. So all of these different things, these would also have to be prophetic in wording. The tahiyyah, right? Tahiyyatu lillahi, right? This would have to be Salah Ibrahimiyya, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. These would have to be, again, something that are prophetic in their wording. Okay, where else? Allah's names. This has to be something that is in wording, not in meaning. And those that are considered small and encompassing. For example, the Prophet ﷺ said, ad-dīn an-nasīḥah, that the religion is sincere advice. So this is a statement that is considered small, is considered encompassing. Why is it not okay to substitute this? Why is it not okay to come with synonyms?
Because to emphasize the meaning of the hadith. And
Right.
if you change it, the emphasis is gone.
Right. So, well, not just that. Can I express such a small idea in the same way that the Prophet ﷺ expressed it?
No.
No. And if there are expressions like this that we know to be small, and there's only one way, or I won't say one way, there is a way to express it, and the Prophet ﷺ expressed it, then we know that that expression is what? The best way. When the Prophet ﷺ said, إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ, and that's it, the hadith stops. Is there a better way to express that? No. So again, anything that is considered what we call jawami al-kalim, then this is something that cannot be changed in what?
wording.
In wording. Narrating from written works, inshallah we'll probably stop here, that this is also conditional, that it is written in a clear, legible form, that it cannot be tampered with, meaning that only I have access to my library. And lastly, if the narrator has weak memory, that he only narrate from his recorded narrations. Is it possible that people, some of the narrators got narrations outside of their library?
Yeah.
Yes, it is. But if they didn't record it, then they are not allowed to
No.
narrate. All right, and we'll stop here. I'll see you guys inshallah after Salat al-Isha for the tafsir class.